Okay, class, we are going to be finishing up today. Going to be touching on a couple of topics we may not have gone into enough, and also we'll go over again what is going to be on your final exam, which is going to be coming up this week, and you'll have plenty of time to do it. And also, please, if any of you have a missing assignment or have missed an exam, please email me. I will get back with you and I'll do everything I can to resolve it. But a zero, just a flat out zero, is a grade killer. So if you've got, even if you've got more than one, let me know and I'll see what, what we can do. I'll look at it and we'll see if it warrants, special consideration, and I will try to, accommodate you as best as I can in any extenuating circumstance. But long and short of it is, get in touch with me. Let me know, because again, a zero is just it just kills your grade. All right. Okay. So we probably didn't talk enough on the Phillips curve. Now, as we know, macroeconomics, the main goal is nice, smooth, strong, steady growth. Typically, we're looking at gross domestic product. While at the same time keeping unemployment as low as possible, which would be that natural rate, which we were looking at, what makes up that natural rate. We're always going to have a certain amount of unemployment in the economy. So keeping the unemployment rate down by the natural rate, and at the same time keeping prices stable, okay? Because those are the two evils. Inflation and unemployment are the two evils of economics. Now, back in the 1960s, we thought we had it all set. This was taught as absolute gospel. It was known as the Phillips curve. Okay, and quite honestly, it did seem to make sense. It was saying that, well, there is a trade-off between inflation and unemployment. You can have high inflation and low unemployment, or you could slide down here and have low inflation, but your unemployment rate's going to be really high. We're on this curve, and it was known as the Phillips curve. And throughout the 60s and even in the beginning of the 70s, 1970s, not 1870s, we were taught that as gospel. But then what happened? Well, then came the mid and late 70s and the 80s, and guess what? We weren't just, as we were talking about sliding along a curve earlier this semester, we found out that not only is it possible to slide around this curve, but that the whole curve, the whole darn curve could shift outward, and we could have both. We could have inflation, high inflation, and high unemployment. And economists hate when that happens. So they said, well, wait, something's wrong here, so we'll have to rethink this. And they did. So they said, well, let's get a name for it. And since we had high inflation and a stagnant economy with high unemployment, they combined the two words and they called it stagflation. And that's what we were going through. Now, quite honestly, this will not be on the final exam, but I want to go through it briefly with you folks. There are going to be 5 essay questions. This probably will not be one of them, all right? But I wanted to touch base with you. Now, so what happened? Well, they thought of it and they said, well, there has to be a rate of unemployment that is so high that no one is going to expect any inflation. We're going to keep inflation at zero. Some books have it at 6%, and they graph it as 6. Our book typically has it at 5%. But the long and the short of it is, they came up and they said, well, you know what? Basically, there are two curves. Just like we had the short-run aggregate supply and long-run aggregate supply. Remember those? Okay. Well, we have a long-run Phillips curve and a short-run Phillips curve. Short-run Phillips curve is the kind that we came to know in the mid-60s. Now the long-run Phillips curve is at an unemployment rate that's so high, typically people won't expect inflation. And even if we do something, for instance, if we were, let's say we were, and I just drew this up quickly, there was a Okun's law. It's a fairly simple law. It says, all right, if the government increases economic activity by 2%, unemployment will go down 1%. So basically you're saying there's a 2-to-1 ratio between increasing economic activity and lowering unemployment. So basically how it looks like would be this graph. Here we are. Remember, long run, short run equilibrium. Well, if the government wanted to, and we were here at unemployment and zero inflation, what he's saying is, look, if we increase, if the government wanted to lower unemployment, let's say it's at 5%, we'll use, our textbook. And let's say they wanted to lower it 2 points. Well, if they wanted to lower it by 2 points, they have to increase economic activity by 4%. So here, here's what happens. Let's say they do. Let's say they either a fiscal or a monetary stimulus. And again, we won't get into the argument of money neutrality or long-term, short-term. We'll talk about that in a minute. But either one, somehow the government, gets that aggregate demand and shifts it to the right. And let's say it shifts it by 4%, okay? Now, we were here. Now, what's going to happen is, we will be on the short-run Phillips curve, and we'll slide up and back to a point where inflation now is actually going to pick up, okay? And it's not surprising, because remember we talked about, at that point we were beyond our potential, and prices are going to be going up, wages are going to be going up. So it's pretty understandable that we're going to have inflation ticking up. So what happens is we're up here, but people are thinking, wow, 5%, okay. But what happens is, in the long run, barring any additional occurrences, people will come to expect that as just natural, as just part of doing business, and we will move back towards this long-run Phillips curve, okay? So the long-run Phillips curve is a vertical line going down, similar to the long-run aggregate supply curve. Short-run Phillips curves are this, okay? And that's about all we have to remember about that. But again, it just shows that in economics, sometimes we're working on a theory that we think this is absolutely true, and then something happens, and then we have to rethink it, okay? All right. Now, we did finish off last time, if you recall, we were talking about international flows of funds and involving, obviously involving international trade. Well, that begs the question, should we trade at all? Well, I think, we saw that trade is a good thing. It puts a country outside of their production possibility frontier, so that is a good thing. So generally, you're not going to get too much of an argument from economists on international trade. However, you will still get the argument, and there is some validity to that. You know, we want it to be fair, fair trade. And I can speak at first-hand knowledge of it because I had some roommates in my home, in the house I was living at when I was at Georgetown, and we were going over economics, and they ended up becoming economic and commercial attaches for not only Mexico, but they also went over to France. And don't know if I would have sent them, to be perfectly honest. So we need to make sure that when we send people and we're going to work out these trade negotiations, we send some sharp people. We don't want to send a bunch of folks that may not do quite as good a job. And I'm not criticizing them. I'm just saying that I might not have sent them. All right, regardless. You know, well, we won't get into these fallacies, but let's talk about the argument for protection. Should we protect, you know, our domestic industries? And that goes all the way back to Alexander Hamilton. He was the very first one when he proposed this infant industry argument, okay? That goes back to 1791. And at that point, and it did seem to make sense, our textile, our clothing industry, certainly our steel industry. I mean, you know, you're looking at the fledgling infant steel industry of the United States and compare it to Great Britain. I mean, there was no comparison. Yeah, it was an infant industry. And at that point in time, did it need protection? Well, as the argument goes, yes, it did, okay? So that's what they built this whole argument around, you know, certain industries that when they're just starting out, they can't be overshadowed by these other well-developed industries from other countries. They'll just be crushed. And to a certain extent, there is some truth to that. What we have to be careful about is, though, that after our industry gets, you know, moving and developing, and it can stand on its own 2 feet, then we have to ask ourselves, okay, wait a minute, they're no longer infants. Let's take another look at this, okay? The second argument for tariffs is job creation. Does it create jobs or doesn't it? Well, the tariff that they passed in the early part of the Great Depression, Smoot-Hawley, that was the worst tariff ever. I mean, it killed our farm jobs, okay? Because what happened was we taxed, remember, a tariff is a tax on imports. It's just a flat-out tax on imports. A quota, which also shows up on this graph, is, remember, it's a limitation on how much is brought in, okay? Now, typically, quotas don't get as much press as a tariff. You know, when an administration puts a tariff on foreign tires or some other product, it gets a lot of news, okay? For some reason, quotas, although they have typically the same effect, they don't get as much publicity. Anyway, do they create jobs? Well, they certainly didn't in the Great Depression. Some, you know, in Crash Course Economics, they talk about, you know, outsourcing jobs, and she talks about, you know, guess what? All the people at the TV manufacturers were let go and laid off, and but now she saved $200 when she bought a TV, which she blew on a baseball game and a dinner at Chipotle, which actually is getting a little bit more expensive now that inflation is really starting to tick up, but that's another issue. Anyway, job creation. the debate goes back and forth on that one. Generally, the feeling is it doesn't necessarily, tariffs don't necessarily create jobs, and in the long run don't necessarily protect them, but there is still a debate about that. And my own personal experience, knowing the Fisher family and General Safety, when all 5 of those plants right next to ours in St. Clair Shores, when they moved them all over to Mexico, there were a lot of people out of work, a lot of really good people out of work, okay? And again, not necessarily strictly speaking tariffs. In other words, we're not putting a tax on foreign seatbelts, but could have, I mean, if they were being made overseas, all right? But that's more in job, outsourcing. But it's just, it left me with a very funny feeling because those are some really good people, and once in a while I still see them, and the vast majority of them get jobs that were anything close to what they had. Well, no. But the job creation argument or job protection, does have some valid points. It doesn't really, protect jobs. It may give domestic industry a little time to adjust, but it could backfire as it did in the Great Depression and end up hurting folks in other industries. So this one is still, up for debate. National defense. Okay, national defense. That's usually a pretty safe bet, and I know because we did a lot of national defense work, and I always loved to work on long-term contracts with the Air Force, because let's face it, if you're working on the instrument panel of an F-18, we're probably not going to have companies in China working on those parts and quoting to make those parts for us, okay? Well, of course, China probably already has the plans for them anyway. But anyway, we would not outsource or we would not purchase parts that had to deal with national defense. So that was always a good argument. We would keep products that could affect our national defense. We would, put a tax on them. All right, we're going to keep that particular item, being well made in the United States. All right. Anyway, the big 3 again, and you'll have to remember this. This will probably be one of the first questions. This probably won't have the most points, but it's the infant industry argument, protecting our startup domestic industries, job creation. It's trying to protect jobs and make more jobs, although, the jury is still out on that one. And national defense. Typically, we want to have manufacturers that can do the parts in this country that would support our national defense. I mean, gee whiz, just imagine if we outsourced some chip manufacturer and we couldn't make cars or trucks. That would be a real problem, wouldn't it? I'm sorry. I had to say that because knowing some of the folks from the 1960s and 1970s, the old automotive guys, they would have had a field day today with another company overseas making or not making chips, so we can't build cars and trucks. Are you kidding? And how long has this been? This has been quite a while. They would have had a plant up definitely in a few months. But I digress. All right. So graphically, here's what the tariff would look like, and a quota, pretty much, we can get into more detail. I do teach an advanced international class, and we do get into more detail on the differences, but it is true, by and large, a quota looks very similar to this. So what happens? Well, we have our good old supply and demand curve, okay? But now we're talking about domestic supply and domestic demand, okay? All right. And remember, in the first couple of weeks of class, we said where they intersect, we got that happy medium equilibrium, and we've got, everything above it was consumer surplus. The consumers would have been willing to pay more, but they didn't have to because the market had established a price. And below it was the producer surplus. The producers, some might have been willing to sell it for less, but they didn't have to because the market had established a price. And then, in fact, it was one of your questions on an exam. Well, what happened, let's say, if the price floated up above equilibrium, or if the price floated down below equilibrium? So in this case, let's look at it. The world price right now, let's say it's way down here, okay? Now, if this was, generally speaking, what the domestic price was, as we learned early on in the course, what would we have here? Well, you'd say, well, we've got, the quantity demanded way out here, but the quantity being supplied is way back here. So we've got this big gap. So we have a shortage, and you'd be right. But now we're talking about the whole world, all the countries of the world, and we are talking about, let's say, the world price, and let's go on the assumption that the world price is lower, and this is the world price. Well, with now, if we have free trade right now, what used to be a shortage is now what? Now it's all filled in by imports. So we are importing. We are importing this. There's no more this shortage gap. All right. So now our triangle looks like this. Now, again, producers aren't real happy about this because they're squeezed all the way down into this little triangle here. All right. Consumers are really happy. They've got this whole thing going for them. Okay. So what happens? The producers, and just like the big three when they went to the administration many years ago, said, hey, we got to do something about these foreign imports, whether it's a quota or a tariff or what. So let's say they put a tax on it, and this is the tax, that much. It's slapped on the imports. Okay, so what does it do? Well, naturally, it raises the price up to here. Okay, that's price with the tariff. Okay, so what's going on? Well, what's going on is we have an area. We were here, but now the price is higher. So we have a triangle here and a triangle here, and guess what? That's just dead weight. That's consumers not buying it because it's a higher price, and it's also allowing inefficient producers to produce. So this is dead weight, and this is dead weight. This center portion, that's the tax. That's the income the government's getting. So, and for the most part, to keep it simple, we say, all right, and the difference between, quota operates very similarly, except it doesn't have any government revenue. It could, in terms of when they have auctions for the rights, but we won't get into that one. Anyway, so we have deadweight loss, we have government income, and here's something: the consumers pick up this big chunk of, consumer surplus, okay? I'm sorry, I'm sorry. The producers pick up this big chunk of producer surplus. So, again, producer surplus moves from this little triangle, so all the way up to here. So, and this is all you have to remember, with the tariff, the domestic price rises, by whatever the tariff is, and producer surplus picks up this area here, A, okay? It also reduces the demand. Demand slides back to here, okay? We are creating two black wedges of dead weight loss. And then we have, government's happy about, we have this happy little area where the government gets their tax income from the tariff, okay? So again, I'm sorry, producers were squeezed down into this little area with the tariff, brought it up to here. The producers pick up A, so they're all the way up to here now. Now their triangle is starting to look a little bit better, okay? And again, we have dead weight loss. Government picks up income. Producers pick up a good chunk. Quotas are similar. And the main thing we have to watch out for is we have to watch out for retaliatory tariffs. We have to, that's why we need some good people, to see, hey, what's the upshot of it? If we, implement this tariff, can we get hurt by a retaliatory tariff, by these other countries, or is the fact of the matter that this is going to do so much good for us, we can afford to take the hit. It's still going to be better. All right. Okay. So that's it. That'll be one question. It won't be have as many high points as the other 4 questions, which basically we've gone through those already, but I will run through them again. You see how the time's going? I don't want to make this one too long either. Okay. Again, this will be the biggest question. This will have the most points. Money. All right? I'm telling you right now, 5 questions, but money is going to have the biggest amount of points to it. And again, what is money? It's a basic asset. All right? And what do we do with it? It's a basic asset that can be easily used. Those are the keys. Basic asset that can be easily used to buy goods and services with, okay? Now, there were different types through the ages. We had, we're going to have a couple of bonus questions, not worth a tremendous number of points, but there might be 3, 4 bonus questions, each worth maybe 2 or 3 points. So, it'll add up. We've used different things for money. Cattle. Of course, cattle was a little tough to bring to market all the time. Once in a while, not too bad, but I mean, every day would be a little rough. Other things were used as money. Salt. In the Roman Empire, the Roman foot soldier was paid in salt. And that's where you get the term, you're not worth your salt. Because at the end of the week, when they got their bag of salt, if the soldier hadn't been doing such a great job, the sergeant might say to him, well, you're not worth your salt this week, okay? And that's where we got the term for that, okay? But other things could be anything from canned mackerel, cigarettes in POW camps, And then we got more sophisticated and we moved into the more precious metal. And again, on that discussion question, remember there was it's showing you a 1980 penny, and remember they changed it after 82. The pennies weren't all, I mean, they still look like copper, but they're not. And if you can get, you know, an old penny that's all copper or almost all copper, with the money market the way it is, you can get 1.5 cents. Theoretically, if you were allowed to melt the pennies down, which we're not supposed to. But anyway, so in and of itself, it has value, and so that's a hint to the answer to that. Although these are going to be on the exam as well. All right. So again, Adam Smith said, you know, money doesn't make anything in and of itself, but it's like a highway through air. It doesn't take up any space, which is true, but it does make trade so much easier, okay? So that is a great description of, you know, what money does, all right? And he does mention, it does solve the double coincidence of wants, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, okay? All right, then, well, how do we measure money? All right, well, we said yes, there have been other forms of money, canned mackerel, cigarettes, salt, cattle, but now let's move on into our current economy today. How do we measure? Well, the narrowest form of the money supply is M1, and that is cash or actual currency actually in circulation, all right? Actually the cold hard cash that's in circulation. Interestingly, during the Roaring 20s, 1920, 1928, when the money supply was ballooned by so many billions of dollars, the actual money, the paper money actually went down slightly. I mean, the actual physical paper money went down slightly, but you don't have to remember that for the final exam. All right, so M1, cash, currency in circulation, traveler's checks, which you probably haven't used, your parents probably haven't used, but your grandparents perhaps have used, and checkable bank deposits. You know, and again, maybe you don't have a checking account. My daughters don't know what checkable deposits are. So I know a lot of folks don't have checking accounts and you don't really use them all that much, but those are counted as part of M1. Now M2, what does that include? Well, it includes all of M1 and it includes savings deposits and what they call the near money, time deposits. You know, you tied up your money for 3 or 5 years, that sort of thing. Money market funds, small certificates of deposit, that sort of thing. That all is part of M2. And when it's all said and done, M2 is there's about a 4-to-1 ratio between M2 and M1. Okay? All right. So let's get into what you'll have to know, the types of money. Okay, which kind of coincides with the. I'm warming you up with that discussion question for the exam. Well, the earliest type was commodity money. Okay. Now, as we said, it was all well and good to bring your cattle or salt or mackerel, you know, and use it as currency, but it was a little impractical. And let's face it, silver or gold or copper coins, they sure seemed to last a lot longer, and they were a lot easier to carry around. So we started out with this, what is called commodity money, and that means money that in and of itself, it has value. It is, you know, whether it's an ounce of gold in an Italian coin, or an ounce of gold in a French coin, or an ounce of gold in a Egyptian coin, it's still an ounce of gold, all right? You can melt it down any way you want, but it's an ounce of gold. In and of itself, it has value. That is commodity, that is the heart and soul of commodity money. It has intrinsic value. And our money used to have that. We used to, well, the pennies used to, from 82 back. They were copper. Our dollars, so, you know, were silver certificates. They could be redeemed for silver coins, and for 1 year, actually, silver ingot. Okay, but the Fed called them in, and they replaced those silver certificates with Federal Reserve notes. Okay, and those are the three types of money that you saw on the discussion question for this week. Okay, now what happened was after this, you know, we were getting further and further away from actually having the money have you know, have value, and this might be an extra credit. What was the earliest form of inflating the currency? Well, Henry VIII was one of the greatest coin clippers in history. They would take the coins and they would just clip just the very edges off of them. You know, they'd call in the currency from all over and clip the edges. Okay, now you do that to all the coins, you're going to end up with a lot of silver and gold. Okay. Also, they shaved just slightly the face of the coin. All right, that was one of the early forms of inflating. Might be an extra credit question, or then we come to the problem of making change. It always wasn't so easy, even with coins, to make change. It wasn't that we had a penny, a nickel, a dime, a quarter, you know, so on and so forth. So sometimes making change with coins was difficult, and they came up with that pieces of 8. Okay, and the interesting thing about that was you could break them into pieces and make change with them. Okay, that's where we got the term 2 bits. 2 bits becoming 25 cents. So in the old movies, people would buy something and they say, "How much is that?" and say 2 bits. That meant it was a quarter. That might be an extra credit question. Okay. So anyway, so we have this commodity money, but you know, again, some of the money was, you know, heavy, and they were carrying it around, and they wanted a little bit easier way to move this money. And what happened was they were leaving the money with the goldsmiths, who were giving them receipts for, you know, the bags of silver or gold or copper, and they were taking the receipts to town, and lo and behold, the receipts were being accepted as currency. All right, so we start moving into now what is called commodity-backed money, meaning the paper itself isn't worth anything. For instance, the coin, commodity money, is worth something. A 1980 penny, I don't care if you don't like pennies, but in and of itself, it's worth, you know, that much copper is worth a certain amount of money. Well, with commodity-backed money, the paper itself is not worth anything, but the writing on it is. Just like our silver certificates from the mid and early 60s and before, they could be redeemed. Commodity-backed money is exactly what it says. It is backed up by a precious commodity. It can be redeemed for gold or silver. Okay? That's the whole idea behind commodity-backed money. Okay? And that is the difference between silver certificate as a commodity-backed money, and then we move into what we have now, fiat money, which just says Federal Reserve note. All right? It's not backed up. It's backed up by your and my faith in the federal government. And yes, the federal government, does it have assets? Yeah, you bet it does. But does it, I mean, is it ready to back up the currency with silver and gold? No, not so much. So fiat money is money by decree. Who decrees it? The government decrees it to be money, and we accept it because we have faith in the government. Okay? All right. So that's fiat money. I may have to go to another clip. I don't want to make this one too long. Well, basically, we're just really running through what we've already looked at. Problems with fiat money? Well, the big one is inflation. Government, you know, it's so easy for the government to print more money. Let's face it. That is the biggest problem with fiat money. Okay. Now, again, might be an extra credit. And before the Civil War, we didn't have national currency. Banks issued the currency, and how the South became known as the land of Dixie. It became known as the land of Dixie because the Citizens Bank of Louisiana was a very strong bank in New Orleans and issued lots of currency, and people accepted it, you know, throughout the South. And the $10 bill denomination was very popular. And since they had such a heavy French influence down there, they printed their money French on one side, English on the other. And 10 in France is DIX, which is typically pronounced, my high school French is 10. But they pronounced it, then they pronounced it as Dix. And they became known as Dixies. And that's how the South became known as the land of Dixie. But again, the greenbacks, the Union printed up, they weren't backed up in the beginning because the Union needed the money to finance the Civil War, which wasn't going so well in the beginning. But it was finally backed up by gold, finally after the war in 1873. Okay, now the roles of money. Number one, medium of exchange. It solves that double coincidence of wants. It's the coincidence that I'm making what you want and you're just happening to be making what I want. Oh, that's great. We can exchange. That's just a coincidence. You know, that we both have the double wants, the same wants. That's not going to happen all. In fact, it's not going to happen most of the time. So a role of money is a medium of exchange. It can be used easily to buy goods and services, okay? Again, eliminating bartering, and you can buy all sorts of things and you don't have to worry about what that person's making. All right, a store of value. Again, we talked about not as important as it once was, although still, if you're going to have your last 4 months' savings stored in apples or in bags of silver, you would probably go with the bags of silver as a store of value. So typically that still is a role that is important. Not quite as important because there are so many different other financial instruments out there that are used to store value, but still a valid one. Last one, unit of account, needs us to set prices. We don't have to worry about, you know, are they going to have a bunch of different things on their price tag? No, it's all in dollars and cents. It's in money. So we can do it. You know, it's easy, makes trade a lot easier. Okay. That's all going to be probably one question. So it's going to be a lot of parts. And that's another thing. Remember, read the question. All the questions are going to have multiple parts. So it really kills me when somebody's doing a great job on the first part, and then they leave out, maybe they leave out the third or fourth part of the question. Read the question. They're typically not just going to have one little question asking you to explain, they're going to have multiple ideas for you to talk about. That's part of the idea behind these essays. It's they're learning tools to help you think, okay? All right, so now we get into banks, all right, the banking system. Banks are, as we talked about, financial intermediaries in the loanable funds market, and they help in the creation of money by way of fractional reserve banking, meaning they don't keep all their deposits in the bank all the time. They can't, okay? Because remember, what is a bank? A bank doesn't make cars, it doesn't make motorcycles, it doesn't make trucks, it doesn't, it makes loans. That's how a bank makes money. And if it's not making loans, it's not going to be in business. Okay. Major reforms in the banking crisis. FDIC, that was probably the most important macro reform. Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, guaranteeing our money in the bank. Stopping bank runs, really important, okay? Two, they wanted to have the banks have a little buffer, so they wanted them to have an 8% insurance over and above capital requirement, okay? Just they wanted to keep an 8% insurance above what they thought they were going to need. Reserve requirement, how much they have to keep in their vault or the vault at the Fed, which is 10% now. Discount window, here's the bank borrowing from the Fed, okay, at the discount window at the discount rate. And again, typically the banks will want to borrow from each other in the federal funds market first, but we'll talk about that in a minute, okay? So how does, again, and you're not going to have to draw it out, but you are going to have to explain it pretty well. How does the banking system, this fractional reserve banking, create money? Well, it creates money by keeping a fraction of all its assets in the bank, loaning out the rest. How does that work? Well, again, we have a town, didn't have any money, somebody came in with $10,000. All right, now there's $10,000 in our town, okay? Put it in the bank. That's a liability for the bank. The bank has to keep 10% of that, so it has to keep $1,000 as a reserve requirement, but gets to loan out the rest, and it does. It loans out the other $9,000, all right? Now, it loans out that $9,000 to someone else in our town, okay? And they take that $9,000, and they, guess what? They put it in bank number 2. Now, look what has happened with just one transaction. We went from a town that had $10,000. Now, you ask the first individual, hey, how much money do you have in the bank? He or she would say, oh, I got 10,000. The second individual would say, hey, how much? And she or he might say, oh, I've got 9,000. Well, you got 10 and you got 9. We have $19,000 in our town. With one transaction, we almost doubled our money supply. And if you take this, and they would take that 9,000, keep 10%, which is 900, and loan out the rest. And remember, the banks always want to loan out as much as they can because that's what a bank does. That's what how a bank makes money, okay? By making loans. And again, keep this rule of thumb in mind. More money out there, expanding the economy. Bringing money in, contracting the economy. Now we can argue the long and the short of, is it expansionary only in the short run? Is it contractionary only in the short run? Contractionary in the short run, but in the long run it's neutral. What we have to remember, generally speaking, for our intents and purposes, we will look at pumping money into the economy is going to expand the economy. All right, you can argue that may be in the short run. But how long is that short run going to be? You know, some of the greatest economic minds in the country, you know, either have no idea or an incorrect idea. So eventually, in the long run, yes, you know, things get back to normal. Money may indeed be neutral, but just for our intents and purposes, we're gonna look at, hey, you pump money into the economy is going to expand. You pull money out of an economy, that economy is going to contract. You allow banks to loan out more money, economy is going to expand. If you don't allow them to loan out as much, the economy is going to contract a bit. So for instance, if we with a 10% reserve requirement, if we did it 1, 2, 3, if we continued to do this, we would end up at the end of this whole process with a money supply that was 10 times what the original was. So we'd be 10 times 10,000. We'd end up with $100,000. And that goes to the multiplier, which is 1 over the reserve requirement. Now, if the reserve requirement is 1/10 or 10%, it would be 1 over 10%. Remember, if it's 1 over a fraction, you just flip it, and it comes up with 10. Same thing now the Fed, again, this is one of the tools of the Fed, which we're going to talk about in a minute. If the Fed raises the reserve requirement, what does that do? Well, the banks have to keep more money in the vault. They're not happy about it, but you know that's exactly what they have to do. So if they raise the reserve requirement to 20%, now they can only loan out 8,000, and then you know it'll go smaller all the way down the line. So if they have to keep 20%, that's 1/5. Now at the end of this process, the money won't grow by a factor of 10. It'll only grow by a factor of 5. So that 10,000, instead of becoming 100,000, would become 50,000. It still grows, but that's how much effect that reserve requirement can have on the money supply. And again, in general, money in, it's going to grow it. Money coming out, it's going to contract it. All right? All right, so that's going to be an important question. And as I said, there's 5. So we got 2 more. All right, the next one is the monetary policy of the Central Bank of the United States, the Federal Reserve. Okay. And this is it right now. Central Bank of the United States, the Fed, established 1913. It conducts monetary policy, all right? It is the central bank of the United States, and it also sees to the regulation of the banking system, okay? Now, what does it do? All right, number 1, it's got 4 major tools. There's only 3 in your book. There are 4 in reality, so don't give me 3. Otherwise, you're going to lose points. Okay, number 1 tool, and remember, the Fed is the banker's bank, the bank of last resort, which we'll get to in a minute. All right, number 1 tool is called open market operations. And open market operations is this: the Federal Reserve and the banking system have this interaction. Now, the Fed can either buy or sell what they call treasury bills, all right, T-bills. Now these T-bills are government bonds, securities, very short term, and typically very, very, very low interest, but very safe. I mean, almost money, okay? If the Fed looks at the banking system and buys treasury bills from the banking system, so what is it doing? It's putting money into the banking system, taking the treasury bills. What has it just done? Well, it's putting money into the system that's going to expand the economy. And it can do the reverse. It can sell treasury bills to the banking system. And if it sells treasury bills to the banking system, it's pulling money out of the economy, and that's going to contract the economy. Okay? And that's their number one tool. Although they've been making some headlines now with that quarter point increase, and I think we're probably going to be seeing some slow, gradual increases in rates, which probably is going to mean, we're going to be fighting inflation for certainly a bit this year and into next year, and hopefully everything will work out. The second tool of the Fed is the reserve requirement, the amount that banks have to keep in their vault at all times or in with the Fed, okay? Now, it can be expansionary or contractionary. If they lower the reserve requirement, that means the banks can loan out more money. That would be expansionary. If they raise the reserve requirement, like we were just talking, from 10 to 20%, well, the banks can't loan out as much money, so that is going to be contractionary. All right? The discount rate, that is the rate. Again, the banks have to have that reserve requirement, and if they fell short one evening, they would go to their fellow banks, all right, in the federal funds market and borrow. Typically, these are big amounts of money, but for a very short period of time. You know, they call them up and say, hey, I need 85 million for 2 days. And, you know, the banks do this all the time. They make these transfers at night all the time, okay? However, if all the banks were pretty much tapped out, they all had made their reserve requirement, and you're having trouble finding, one of your friends to loan you money in the federal funds market, then you would have to go to the banker's bank, the bank of last resort. You'd have to go to the Fed and borrow money from the Fed. And you would borrow it at the discount rate at the discount window, which oddly enough is anywhere from a quarter to a whole point higher than the federal funds rate, okay? That's why you go to the federal funds market first, because it's cheaper. And again, these are huge amounts of money, typically very, very, very short term, few days, something like that. But still, in all, you'd rather not spend the extra 0.25% or 1%, to the Fed when you could save it in the federal funds market. All right, moral suasion means polite arm twisting, and they do it all the time. Whether it's the secretary, whether it's the head of the Fed, calling up a couple of big influential banks and saying, we would really appreciate it if you did this or that. You don't have to, but if you don't go along with their suggestion, they will absolutely remember you. And that happens all the time in so many different, at so many different levels in Washington, New York, and throughout the country in the various Federal Reserve banks, all right? Anyway, it's just something that is in actuality, but not in your book, okay? All right. Okay, so remember, pumping money in or out will affect the economy. Most argue that this is in the short run. In the long run, everything will adjust. But the big question is, how long will that adjustment take? And that is a big question. Because like Keynes said, we live in the short run. Okay? All right. So that's going to be your fourth question. And your last one, going back to international. Okay, again, basically the exchange rate, as we were talking about, it is the rate of what one country's money is worth in terms of another country. It can be fixed, this rate can be fixed, like we're always gonna be, 10%, above, they peg their currency to ours, or it can be a flexible or a floating rate. Now, flexible or floating rate, how does that work? Well, guess what? It works just like our old supply and demand curves that we talked about in the very first couple of weeks of class, okay? And supply and demand will affect, the strength or weakness of the dollar or of your currency, okay? So, what happens? Well, when your money is worth more, it is called appreciating, okay? Now, when your money is worth more and it is appreciating, you can buy more foreign stuff, okay? The problem is if you're exporting to other countries, your stuff costs more, okay? Now, if your money is weakening or depreciating, your exports are cheaper, and your people are probably a whole heck of a lot less likely to buy, imported goods from overseas because they're so costly, all right? All right. And that's why China has been doing everything that they possibly can to keep their money weak. I know it doesn't sound good, but that's, it sounds like, well, let's keep it strong. No, they're saying, let's keep it weak. And they do a really good job of it, all right? So their stuff is relatively inexpensive, okay? So how do we strengthen a currency or weaken? 4 ways. And again, I want to stress, it boils down to really, remember we talked about it, if you have a lot of something, no matter what it is, typically its value to you, its price to you, kind of goes down. But as that commodity or whatever it is, that good becomes a little more scarce, its price, its value to you goes up. Same thing with money, except now we're talking about money that's out there on the foreign exchange market, okay? So, number 1, to strengthen your money, you buy up your currency in the foreign exchange market. Get your currency off that foreign. You don't want that money out there. That's to strengthen now. To weaken, you would do just the opposite. You would want to flood the foreign exchange with your currency, okay? 2, to strengthen, you sell foreign assets, okay? Why? Because they're going to need your money to buy those assets, and so you're bringing your money in, you're making your money scarcer. Again, that is to strengthen, okay? To weaken, you would buy foreign assets, okay? You buy foreign assets, get your money out there. Number 3, keep your interest rates high. Why? Well, if you keep your interest rates high, your folks at home are certainly going to be a whole heck of a lot less likely to think about, foreign investments and putting their money, getting your money, your country's money overseas. If we're paying a real good interest rate and England's paying a couple of points less, well, our money will probably stay here, okay? So we're not going to have to worry about the money going overseas. Again, it's all having how much money out there. You don't want to strengthen, you don't want it out there. You want to bring it in, okay? This last one would be restrict domestic residents from buying foreign currency. I know that sounds a little severe, but they're doing it, that would, again, tie in with, supply and demand. Now to weaken, we do all the opposite, and this is exactly what, number 4, this is exactly what China does. They restrict foreign residents from buying up their currency. So if you were going to build a plant over in China and you needed big chunks of Chinese currency, guess what? you're going to have to go through this whole process of getting special permission to buy their currency so you can buy and set up your plant. Now, typically it might not be quite as hard, but yeah, the long and the short of it is, you know, to weaken, you restrict your foreign residents from buying up, you know, they don't want, China doesn't want foreign countries, foreign people to buy up their currency. They don't want their currency out there, okay? All right, now finally the balance of payments. Breaks it down into the current account and the financial account, okay? And this goes to what goes around comes around. Now remember, two things. Current account means it's over, it's done, it happened, boom. It was paid for, or you were paid, or that was it. And it happened, it's current, it's over with. And money going out is negative, cash coming in is positive, right? Now, the financial account isn't over and done with when the transaction takes place. Financial account requires a future action. So some future action, so just boil it down to some future action has to take place, and if there is necessary future action to take place, then it does occur under the financial account. But the same thing is true in terms of negative or positive. If the money is flowing out, it's negative. If the money is flowing in, it's positive. Some examples of a current account, you know, goods. You buy a case of French wine, you pay for it, the money went out, okay, it's over, it's done with a current account. But the money went out of the country, so it would be a negative entry under the current account. Services, you did some tax work for a company in Windsor. It's over, it's done with, you did the work, they paid you, it's over, that's it. Current account, but the money came in, so it's a positive. Transfers, those are, remember, those are what? Those are gifts, okay? So we give aid to a less fortunate country, $50, $100 million, boom. It's a current account, money went out, so it's negative. You or I send $50 to your poor relatives in, you know, in Sweden or Denmark or Spain or wherever. You send $50 to your poor relatives, okay? It happened, it's over, it's done with. You sent the money, so it's current account. Money went out, so it would be a negative entry, okay? Also, factor income. Let's say you worked in Windsor, okay? You worked in Windsor, and at the end, and you worked this week in Windsor. Friday, you got paid, all right? It's over, it's done. There's no future, really. I'm not saying, right now we're just saying it's some operation you did. At Friday, it's over, it's done, you got paid. So what happened? Well, it's current because it's over and done with, but the money went into our country, so it's positive. Now, financial accounts, a little different. Requires future action, all right? Could be a financial asset. You buy a motorcycle plant in Italy, all right? Is that over and done with? No. So, I mean, it's not over and done with. You know, are you going to fix the plant? Are you going to refurbish the plant, or is it operating okay as it is? You know, what's going on? What's happening? It requires future action on your part. So that goes under the financial account. Did you pay for it? Yes, you did. So the money went out of the country, and it would be registered as a negative entry in the financial account, okay? French bonds, all right? Bonds came in, you bought $100,000 of French bonds. You know, is it over and done with? Well, no, of course not. You know, there's a future action. They owe you that money. So there is a future action involved. So that goes under the financial account. And then you just say, well, which way did the money flow? Well, you sent the money over France, so the money went out, so it's a negative. Same thing is if some French folks buy Ford Motor bonds, and they get the bonds. Are they saying, oh, it's over and done with? No, it's not over and done with, because there's a future action. Ford owes them money, owes them payments. Now, which way did the funds go? The funds went from France into the United States, so that would be a positive. Okay, and then when we take all these positive and negatives on both the current account and the financial account, and we bring it all together, we add them all together, by definition, they have to even out, all right? They even out to zero, which, again, brings us to the last part of economics, what we said earlier. Nothing is done in isolation in economics. As in life, you know, what goes around does come around. So be good to each other, and good luck on the test. And if you owe me anything, contact me. I want to know about it, and I'll do whatever I can to help resolve the problem. All right? All right, everybody. You have a great summer, and good luck on the discussion question and the final exam. Take care.